Yesterday, something interesting popped up on my Twitter feed, and yes, I know, interesting, Twitter, same sentence, doesn't really happen these days, but hear me out. It was a screenshot from a broadcast of the Formula 1 back in 2009, showing the list of potential entries for the 2010 season, and it wasn't just one team or two teams or three teams, there was about 9 or 10 on there. There was supposed to be the return of Lola, the addition of ProDrive teaming up with Aston Martin, Superfund, which apparently had Alex Wurz involved, even if it does sound like some sort of crypto scam or pyramid scheme. There was Campos, the only one on the list that made it, but as the HRT team, something that we've looked at in the past. And then you've got Epsilon Euskadi, a team that ran in LMP1 briefly, Lightspeed, which sounds like a name from an unlicensed racing game, N Technology, which was a WTCC team, March, which looked like a naming rights thing, and then Brabham, which was some German bloke trying to use the name without the authorization of the Brabham family, which led to a process of the family then going through the system to get their own name back, which David Brabham now owns. Now this is the part where I say I drive for the Brabham Motorsport esports side of things, which, okay, I know a lot of you aren't interested in the sim racing side of the channel, but the motorsport historian guy driving for a historic team or a historic name, that's actually pretty cool. But enough about me. Today we're going to be looking at a team that was supposed to enter in 2010 but never did for a multitude of reasons. The USF1 team. This is one I did about, what, 5 or 6 years ago, so it's probably due an update. And image-wise, yeah, this is going to be a hard one, isn't it? Look, I'm just going to throw up whatever I can. But apparently, you can just put up other people's footage and just put a watermark of where it came from, no issue. At least, that's how others make it seem, but given my history, I'm not risking it. But it's a challenge. Moving on. Given the struggles that Formula 1 has had when it comes to the United States in America, an all-American F1 team sounds like something that Formula 1 might want to jump on. Because when it comes to Americans and this kind of racing, there have been some decent names involved, but massive success has been something that has eluded them. Dan Gurney, Phil Hill, Mario Andretti and Eddie Cheever are the ones that immediately stick out. But since then, Americans coming to this side of the Atlantic have had struggles. Michael Andretti, Scott Speed and most recently, Logan Sargent. Okay, there's Alex Rossi as well, but he did like one race in a POS manner. Other than Roger Penske's outfit in the 1970s, which managed to bag a win in the hands of John Watson at the 1976 Austrian Grand Prix, has there been a proper, full-on, all-American team? The Anglo-American racers were based in the south of England. Haas has its base in Banbury and its design division is in Italy, and is also effectively the Ferrari hand-me-down team like Sauber was in the late 90s. But actually, when you look at it, Penske's F1 operation was in Poole, in Dorset. RIP. But you forgot Haas Lola. That was in Colnbrook, where Bruce McLaren had originally set up shop. Formula 1 was looking to expand. Applications opened up so that teams could enter in 2008, and one of the teams that wanted to join in was ProDrive, the same people that built Richard Burns' Subaru, and they were also doing some work with Aston Martin at the time. The plan was to enter the sport as McLaren's B team, buying a chassis and sticking an engine in the back, but this all fell apart when the FIA said that they were changing the rules to stop teams like Red Bull designing one chassis and then handing it to others. While teams could commission companies like Dallara to build the car like Haas does today, the actual design has to be done in-house, and it meant that ProDrive's entry stalled. Later on, Dave Richards, the boss of ProDrive, said that it's probably a good thing it never went ahead because the F1 operation would have likely bankrupted the company. Like I say, ProDrive was entering and looking to buy a McLaren chassis, stick their own engine in the back and then do whatever they wanted to do with it. Gary Paffett was supposed to be one of the drivers, but Williams kicked up a fuss when ProDrive was coming in because they basically said, well, hang on a minute, if you're looking to shut this loophole about one team designing the car and then another team having that chassis like Red Bull and Toro Rosso had done, why are ProDrive allowed to do that? So that's where it all fell apart. Ultimately, all the teams reapplied successfully, and with Super Aguri on the grid it meant that only one spot was left available. But given that ProDrive didn't get onto the grid, Formula 1 had actually failed to expand at this point. But as Super Aguri folded around the first quarter of the 2008 season, leaving a grid of 20 cars, Formula 1 wanted new entries on the grid to bolster the numbers, and that's where the list mentioned at the start of the video comes back into play. The FIA didn't just say, we want 2 new teams, one to replace Super Aguri and one more. They opened it up so that 3 new teams could come onto the grid, upping the amount of cars to 24, a number not seen since the 1995 season. You could claim 1997 as well, but was Lola actually racing? Can you really count Lola in all of that? They turned up, had one half-assed qualifying session, and never showed up ever again. And actually, if you go back to the beginning of the video where I showed the list, Lola was one of the potential entries onto the grid for 2010, but the FIA and Bernie shut that down immediately, given the previous time Lola was on the grid. And there was also a team on there called mydreamf1team.com or something along those lines, which was, as the person that kick-started the inspiration for this series in the first place said, the Reddit F1 team. Darkness Pandemic, I salute you. But on the list as well was this team simply called USF1. Team America, and it was going to be the US National Formula 1 team, which had a very A1GP feel about it, but it was going to be a hard job to get it done. The United States isn't an F1 country like here or Italy or France or Germany or Brazil, and they were going to be running the operation out of the US, which is something that Dan Gurney, Roger Penske and Gene Haas had to realise wasn't exactly doable, and moved their factories to England despite having US flags on their licenses. One of the issues that USF1 had to contend with is instead of moving to Motorsport Valley, a region of England that stretches between Birmingham and London bordered by the M1 and M40 motorways, they moved into NASCAR country. And they couldn't be any further inside NASCAR country because they'd moved into an old NASCAR base in Charlotte, North Carolina. But they did see that a portion of the team had to be in Europe for logistics purposes during the season, and they set about setting up a European logistics centre in Aragon, which is in Spain. But the cars would be designed and built in Charlotte and then shipped over to Spain. So they would still be as American as Mama's apple pie, which is actually an English invention. But you know what is an American invention food-wise? Beans on toast. But USF1 and the three teams that did eventually appear on the grid in 2010 did have something that was going to hopefully help them out. At least they should have done. A budget cap. Something that did come in for the 2021 season, but it had been promised for the 2010 season and was the main deal sweetener for anybody wishing to come in. The global financial crisis that had started with the subprime mortgages in the US had hit Formula 1 hard, with Honda and later Toyota and BMW pulling out. And Bernie was trying to protect what was left, but at the same time, still get the numbers back up. It was supposed to be set at around $40 million in 2010 money. But as HRT, Lotus and Manor later found out, those cost caps never materialised, so they were going to be in a sticky situation. If they wanted to be up with the likes of Sauber, Toro Rosso, Williams, they had to spend a lot of money, something they didn't have, and if they overspent, they were only ever going to end up in massive debts. Meanwhile, back in North Carolina, USF1 had been starting to take shape. This whole idea had started in 2006, around the time of that year's Malaysian Grand Prix. So by the middle of 2009, they'd been able to enjoy 3 and a bit years of getting readiness. USF1 could have been on the grid in 2008, but when ProDrive was accepted and then had to pull out, USF1 wasn't in the right place to be able to take the vacated seat on a reserve list. So in America, the two men behind the project, Peter Windsor and Ken Anderson, set about getting all this ready to rock in the first race of 2010. Windsor said to the website Crash, "Ken Anderson first came to me with the USF1 idea in the wake of Dave Richards failing to take his place on the grid as the 12th team. David pulled out, I think, because he wanted McLaren to build his cars. The origin of our team, therefore, was 180 degrees in the other direction. We had to do our own car. It was clear following David's problems that this was F1's future. Every team was going to design and build its own cars, so that was our template from day one, with the proviso that we wanted to make our technology something we could talk about and sell, something unique and fun." And on the basis of it, it was a good idea. The all-American F1 team joining in a sport where the Americans have had a go but never really been able to actually properly crack the sport, and if they did make it onto the grid, they'd have to set up in Europe because of the sport being so Eurocentric. But if they could get the right backing and market themselves as the American National Formula 1 team, it might capture the public's imagination, and American motorsport fans will have another category to follow other than IndyCar and NASCAR. Because USA #1 and all of that, says the guy that did an entire video on why Britain is the best in the world at motorsport. I mean, which it is, you know, no lies were told in that video, but alright, I'll stop digging. But despite getting the co-founder of YouTube involved, things weren't exactly going well. The other two teams invited to the 2010 season, Mana and Campos Meta, who later became the Virgin and HRT teams respectively, had managed to get something together that resembled an F1 team. HRT had outsourced the building of their cars to Dallara, while Mana, despite struggling on the financial side, was also making progress. But the F1 journalists were talking about how much of a disaster this USF1 thing was going to be. With Andretti, despite not even being accepted onto the grid yet, I mean, it depends when you watch this video, but at least they're trying. They're building facilities, they're hiring staff, they're designing, they're talking to people, they're doing this, and this. And it just seems like they're ready to have a red hot go at it, despite the fact they might not necessarily be challenging the likes of McLaren and Red Bull if they finally get on the grid. But for USF1, everything was doom and gloom every single time they were mentioned. But USF1 had announced a driver, Jose Maria Lopez, who brought a significant amount of backing from the Argentinian government, I never know which way around it is. The plan had been to find 2 American drivers and stick them in the cars and not rely on paid drivers for survival. But Lopez was Argentinian and was bringing a substantial amount of money, and he'd been running in GP2 at the time to a largely anonymous standard. He'd won 1 race and come 9th in the driver's standings 2 years running or something along those lines, and he was also 27 years old. Supposedly, USF1 had toyed with the idea of signing Danica Patrick, which would have been a huge signing on the attention front, but it never happened. Who was the second driver supposed to be? Answers on a postcard. I just googled it on a whim. I fully appreciate that Josh Ravel has already done this video, but I did it way back in, 2018, 2019 or something along those lines. So yeah, more information has come out since I did that video. But anyway, it was supposed to be a guy called James Rossiter, a British driver. So they were the All-American F1 team. They had a British-Australian guy at the head of the operation. They had an Argentine driver signed up for 1 seat and a British driver in the other seat. Time for another tea party, I think. But still, could be worse. Yeah, about that. In the early days of 2010, Autosport posted an interview with an anonymous USF1 employee that basically exposed how ill-prepared the team was. Going back to early December, it was pretty evident that something was up, inasmuch we kept expecting a big push in production starting sometime in mid-December, but it never materialised. We're all pretty experienced in various aspects of car design and build, and we all know what it takes from a timeline standpoint. So when it became apparent that the drawing office wasn't releasing drawings at the rate we expected, it started to become clear we could be in trouble. All engineering decisions were having to be funneled through Anderson before anything could be signed off, and that's where the holdup was. Tooling for the tub was completed in early December, but then it sat for nearly a month before the laminate schedules for the outer skin were approved. Now, Anderson himself wasn't designing the laminate schedule, but he was in the wings. As early as last October, the production manager was collared about the lack of resources, but the managers were put off by saying, well, Ken has a plan. The irony of all this is that there has been precious little in the way of formal planning and documentation. No production schedules, simply very little in the way of planning. And it's not like the 2 guys behind this were complete novices, because Windsor is a very prominent motor racing journalist who was the Grand Prix editor of F1 Racing magazine for many years, as well as the sponsorship and team manager at Williams, as well as working for Ferrari in the late 80s. Windsor has then gone on to work for Formula 1, presenting race highlight reels from classic Grand Prix, and has a successful YouTube channel with over 150,000 subscribers, where he does things like live streams after races and other bits and pieces, like doing the tech rundowns with Craig Scarborough. Ken Anderson has worked as an engineer in motocross, kart, the Indy Racing League, and NASCAR, as well as Formula 1 with teams like Onyx. On February the 17th, 2010, the New York Times posted a headline titled "Sponsorship Woes Threaten Future of US Formula 1 Team," which is locked behind a paywall, so I can't read the whole thing. On top of this, the team had a 4-year-old Cosworth engine, and Cosworth didn't have anything to go on with regards to making sure this thing was actually ready to go or not. Basically, what the team had was a tub and a CAD drawing, at which point phone calls were being made to the factory to see how they were getting on. But when the interview with Autosport was published, the FIA took these allegations incredibly seriously, so Charlie Whiting was flown out to investigate. Charlie was hoping to see everything at a fever pitch to get the cars ready for the first round, but when he got there, he found the sweet sum of all. All they found completed was a single tub and a nose cone. Nothing that resembled a full car. There are rumours that the people working there were designing toasters to pass the time. On the 3rd of March 2010, Autosport reported that the USF1 team had completely shut down. They missed the 2 pre-season tests, the cars never ran, and everybody there lost their jobs. So what the hell happened then? It seemed that a lot of stuff went wrong for them, but a lot of people just seemed to go, wins are bad. One of the issues was that USF1 was banking on the cost caps being implemented, which Lotus, HRT and Virgin were also banking on. But when the top teams stomped their feet and threatened to quit, those cost caps never got put into the latest edition of the Concord Agreement that was signed in 2009, by which point the 3 other new teams were too far along. This supposedly set the USF1 team back a month as they waited on what was happening. Windsor mentioned in an interview with the BBC later in 2010 that he felt that the project needed a bit more time and had been ready to go in the March of 2009, but then mentioned the economic recession and disputes within the sport that combined to turn the American dream into the American nightmare. Up the curtain, lights come on, I'm home. Whoa, whoa. The actual process of the teams getting onto the grid does seem a little bit all over the place. A provisional entry list was released in the July of 2009, showing Campos, Manor and USF1 on there, but Lotus wasn't accepted until the September of 2009, which is when USF1 said that they went all systems go according to Windsor. And with the operation being based in the United States, if they had another year, they might have been able to do it. And this is something that they tried to do. They tried to defer their entry until 2011, or at least delay their entry until around the Spanish Grand Prix of 2010. But the FIA and Bernie both said no, by which point pretty much all of their funding had been withdrawn. Windsor told the BBC, "The premise of our team, the foundation of our team was A, to be the national team, and B, to do our car in America. And I think if we had a year, we could have done it. But in the time we had, it was a big ask to do a factory alone in America, let alone to try and build a car and put a team of people together. We were still hiring people in November and December from existing Formula 1 teams. That was really late. It was either the whole car or nothing at all. It was Ken Anderson's call and he said it would kill our team if we didn't build our own car. He would rather go down doing our own rather than race somebody else's. I didn't agree with that. It was just a question of time, and most of the existing teams will be 2/3 of the way through their 2011 cars already. We didn't start a 2010 car until it was too late, in retrospect, but we didn't know it at the time. The USF1 team remains one of those big mysteries. What if they'd started their project a little earlier? Would they have managed it? Did they have too much ambition? Should they have hired a couple of people that had team principal experience? Would the rumours of the likes of Kyle Busch and Danica Patrick ever come to fruition? The general consensus about the management of the USF1 team was indecisive and without experience. Basically, ambitious but rubbish. There seemed to be no structure. The design team wasn't reporting to an Adrian Newey or a Patrick Head, which then went up even further. It just seemed to be going straight to Anderson, who was already up to his eyeballs in other stuff. At least, that's what I can gather. The other 3 teams managed to get cars out one way or another. The HRT car was late, but it made it. And even the Mike Gascoigne-led Lotus managed to get onto the grid in such a short space of time, but they, A, started the car knowing that they'd have a chance of getting there, and B, it's Mike Gascoigne, but they still struggled. And all 3 of those teams were gone within 6 years. Would USF1 have lasted as long? Might have done. The potential for investment was huge, especially if it was outdoing the other 3 teams. Like mentioned, Windsor is a very prominent and successful journalist, so probably didn't translate to the running of a team. But one thing that will be said, the PR that came out of the team at the time was pretty good. But the FIA realised later on they were being led on a wild goose chase, fining the pair about €300,000 each and banning the USF1 team from ever entering the sport again. But while writing this paragraph, I have an absolute hatchet job on my other screen, calling USF1 a con and other things. I know the project went tits up, but really? Reflecting on the whole thing, Windsor said, "A friend said to me recently that a little bit of humiliation is always good for the soul, and as hard as that is to swallow, I know deep down that she is right. I don't think we were the only startup company not to make it through the recession, and we made it much further down the line than many other race team projects. You think Frank Williams began only in 1978? You think there weren't at least 3 less successful projects prior to McLaren's Project 4? David Richards' F1 operation never made it past the entry stage. No disrespect meant to any of those people or companies, but let's keep things in perspective. For my part, I love life and I love racing, and I appreciate all my friends in racing, even the critics, more than ever before. I also try to remember to be grateful every day for the opportunities ahead of me." Windsor even said that if he was given the right opportunity, he'd give USF1 another crack. But as it stands, It looks like Andretti might be the next in line to give it a go. There was talk of the leftovers being merged with the mysterious Stefan GP operation, which also never came to fruition. Now, Stefan GP is something that I would love a lot more information on, because that one is interesting. So then, a look at the USF1 project that had a lot of ambition and looked like it could have been done, but it just didn't, for a multitude of reasons. If this has been a fun look through the history books, then do like the video so I know I've done a good job, and for more from the channel, get subscribed and also get the bell on so you never miss out on any future videos. Massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help keep things running around here, a link to Patreon will be in the description, along with links to Discord, socials and other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. There's also super thanks if you just want to top up my coffee cup, and memberships if Patreon seems a bit iffy for you but you still want to do a Patreon style form of support. And there's affiliate links down there too if you just want to get your USGP swag and stuff like that. So until next time, I've been Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.